that day, my father didn't come home, and we didn't know where he was, the 10th, 11th. Things, what is now known as Kristallnacht, because of all the broken glass, were unbelievable what happened in Vienna. I saw a lot of it. And even though there was Ausgehverbot, which meant you couldn't go out, I went out. I was very blonde and blue-eyed, and I tried to look like somebody with a attaché case going to the lawyer, which I did. We tried to get father out. So I walked around quite a bit. I must have known that one of these days I have to talk about it. So I saw horrendous things. I saw people being made to wash the sidewalk and being beaten just with the whip, as I said. There was no authority that you could report to. That was the awful thing. This was accepted that they were supposed to do that. And the police had absolutely no authority after what happened in that march. There were some very good people, too, that give you a phone call, said, we're sorry about all this. Are you all right? Do you need help? There was a lot of that going on. I don't think you hear enough of that, how many kindnesses there were committed by people. We were sitting at home waiting for our father to come home. That's the only thing I can think of. Anytime the phone rang or anytime the doorbell rang or something happened, some news from father, it was a very, very difficult time, very difficult. We finally, after about 10 days, we got the first communication from my father. I'm fine, don't worry, that sort of thing. So we did get communication for the next few weeks. This got into December then, the last Christmas that my sister and I were going to spend with my mother and her sister and brother-in-law who moved in with her. And one of the things that father wrote again and again, that girls should go on with that trip to America, which of course was a difficult thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. The first letter from our mother, we stayed with our cousins in New York. First letter of my mother brought the sad news that my father had died in Dachau. One day, I don't know, it must have been soon after we left. No, he died on the 23rd, so it was after that somebody appeared at her door with a box of ashes from her husband. So it was a rather horrid news to her, and of course it was very difficult for us to make our way in this country with that news coming.
And I think it was a 2-bedroom apartment. And three of us, my other grandmother, about 6, 7 people rained in on them that night. And they put us up. We slept wherever we could. And we stayed there for 9 months. We really didn't know what was happening in Leszczynish until after my mother was called back. There was a befehl, an order for all the Jews to pay and go back to their houses and repair them, repair the damage that was done on Kristallnacht. So my mother had to do that. It was so dreadful when my mother went into the house. It wasn't enough to steal, but whatever they didn't steal, they had to destroy. Our baby pictures that were hanging on the walls were stabbed with scissors, the glass broken, and the scissors jabbed into the baby pictures. That told her something. All the prayer books, anything of a religious content, was taken to the attic. It was a 4-story house, and dumped into the compost. I still have somewhere in the house one prayer book with egg and compost and manure on it. The toilets were ripped out of the walls. There was nothing left whole. It was dreadful. The only thing we can contribute is our memories and to tell of how we were persecuted simply because of a faith and because a group of criminals decided that Judaism was not a faith but a race, and decided that the whole race had to be destroyed because of that faith. It was a war against God, and the Jewish people became the instrument. And God knows whatever plan may happen in the future, who the instrument will be.
How did I become aware of Kristallnacht, or that something had happened? Um, well, this is not the era of television, radio, etc., etc. And as every other morning, I got ready to go to school, and the school was not all that far from our home. And I guess I had just sort of gained that little bit of independence of being allowed to go to school on my own rather than to be taken every day by my mother. I walked by our synagogue. Hordes of people were standing in front of it and throwing stones through the beautiful stained glass windows. I think that they had gone into the synagogue and ransacked it on the inside. They threw Torah scrolls into the streets. And as soon as I got into the school, teacher sat us down and she said, "Something terrible has happened overnight. And your parents have been alerted to this, and they will come to pick you up." My mother came very shortly after we came to school, and she took me to my grandmother's home. My grandmother lived on the Grindelallee, which was closer to the school than Parkallee, where we lived. And my father was there already, and my grandfather, as I had said before, had passed away. So it was only one of my aunts who was still in Germany, and that's to say an unmarried sister of my mother, and my grandmother, and she had a very large apartment. And my father was there, and so were two other gentlemen. One was a friend of my aunt and uncle, a dentist, and the other gentleman, I don't know, he was a friend of the family. And the reason I said she had a very large apartment, it really ran from one side of the house to the next, and the bedrooms were in the back. And these three gentlemen were staying in that bedroom all the way in the back. We didn't quite know what was happening. My father always was a very courageous man, and you weren't going to tell him that he cannot walk on the streets of Germany. And he went downtown. And I remember him coming back quite shaken up. We went home. We did not make light in the apartment, and we went to bed immediately. And in the middle of the night, they came pounding on the front door. I remember that. And the fear that this instills in a child is a feeling of fear that never in your life can you forget. That feeling of fear is always there. And evidently, now we never came to know this for sure. A next door neighbor opened her door finally and said, "Why are you making so much noise? People are sleeping." And they said, "Well, we want these Jews," and so on. She said, "They're not home."
So they left. Now, did she know we were home and she really didn't want us to be arrested and taken away? Or did she really think we weren't home and so on? We never found that out. But certainly her remark saved us from that. And then we went to my grandmother's house and stayed there for the remainder of the week, which was how long that pogrom lasted. And my father was in the forest in Blankenese for that time. When we Jews talk about the Torah scrolls, this is the basis of our belief. This is the basis of our observance. This is the basis of our lives. This was thrown into the streets. It was torn up. It was desecrated by hordes of people who had absolutely lost all respect of any other people's religion. It works itself right into the fact that you hate for the sake of hating, but you really don't know why you're hating.
I was in Würzburg during Kristallnacht, in the dormitory. During that night, in that dormitory, which was in a very small street in Würzburg, in the middle of the night, we had noise, and they broke in. The janitor in that building, who was non-Jewish, he told us, "Get up, they are coming here, and they're going to make some ruckus, so get up and be ready to leave." There were about 50 boys in this building, and we stayed downstairs. We waited till about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. Then the whole crowd of people came in, whole crowd. And they told us, go outside into the narrow street. They have stone streets in Würzburg, and form lines of five abreast. In the meantime, they called all the populace in order to tell the world that it was not the Nazis, but it was the plain people, you see, the usual people. And they were standing at the side, and we walked through the street, and they were calling us names, they were spitting, they were doing all kinds. And we passed by the burning synagogue. Then they put us into prison cells in the prison, you see. And I was in the prison with about 15 people in the cells, and they kept us there. Every day, less and less people were in the prisons because they sent them to concentration camp. After 6 days, we heard the rumor, tomorrow we empty the prison. That day in the evening, they called us again. That was Thursday evening, I think. And they said, you 7 are free. Free, you can go. But you must report to the Gestapo, the Secret Service police, within 24 hours, each one in his homestead. Now, I tell you the reason why these 7 were let free is because we are stateless. You see, how do you become stateless? You lost your citizenship. Because I was a stateless person. Because my father was Russian, he lost the Russian citizenship. The German citizenship we lost for a long time. So we were stateless. So we had to go within 24 hours back to Bremen. We came to Bremen about 7 in the morning, and I called up my parents, but there was no answer. So I took a streetcar, and I went to my parents' house, and I called there, no answer. We have 2 entrances, one to the business and one to the private quarters. I went to that door, and there was a little piece of paper. It said, "Get the keys from the police department." While I was standing there, on the other side there was a furniture store, and a non-Jewish neighbor, very friendly to us, and he didn't want to go out to talk to me, but he said to me, he beckoned me, "Come in, I won't tell you what happened during the night." He told me that during the night, Nazis came in civilian uniform, and they called your father. When your father didn't come, they broke in there, and they went up to the bedroom, and there was my mother, and one brother, two brothers, because my sister was already in Hamburg, and they asked my mother, "Where's your husband?" Now, either she didn't want to tell them, or maybe she really didn't know, because my father went to this neighbor of ours who told me the story, and he told him, "I'm going to Sweden. It's a neutral country." He never went there. But they came up to the door, and they asked my mother, "Where's your husband?" Of course, she didn't know, or she didn't want to know, I don't know. But when she didn't say this, they killed her. We found a bullet. Now, for Nazis, if you don't answer them, you see, it's a criminal act, and you need this, and they need to shoot you. So they shot her. And I didn't know about it, of course, for all the 7 days I was in prison. And afterwards, before I left Germany, I asked for a death certificate. You know what they wrote in the death certificate? On this day, on the 10th of November, at 4:00 a.m. in the morning, they found my mother dead. They had shot her. They found her dead.
My family, mother and father, both felt very much that they were Germans. They were not Jewish. They were Germans first, German second, German third, and then they were of the Jewish religion. The sudden change from a so-called democracy, the Weimar Republic, to a dictatorship was extremely difficult. And I kept asking my mother, "Mom, what will happen now?" And she said, "I don't know. All I know is the man who hates us is now the person who can lead and direct what's going to happen in Germany." In 1938, we were kicked out of our apartment. We received a letter, I think it was November of 1938, and these guys had the nerve to write that the Aryan renters in this apartment building can no longer accept the fact that they have to live with a Jew under the same roof. And please leave as soon as you can. You got 14 days to find another place. Now, that affects you personally. You know, I mean, there's no way out about it. We had paid always our rent on time and never done any reason, but then the Aryan renters, who probably knew nothing about it because it was written by the association who owned the building, but those are things which hit you personally. Kristallnacht to me was difficult for me to associate with the type of Germans my parents talked about.
On the night of my mother's birthday, it was November, the eve of November the 10th, and my brother and I were very excited about my mother's birthday coming up, and we went to sleep in our bedroom, and I think it must have been maybe 11 or maybe a little bit later than 11 o'clock at night. All of a sudden, some bricks and rocks were being thrown through our window. And my brother was always braver than me. He was a year younger, but he was braver, and I was hiding under the blanket, and he went to the window to check to see what was going on.
And he told me that it was the people in our neighbors, the people of our town were throwing the bricks and rocks through the window. And he also told me that the civil policeman in our town was standing on the edge of the crowd, and he didn't do anything about it. So we became very frightened, and we started to go across the hall to our parents' bedroom. Now, while we were crossing the hall, our front door is at the end of the hall. Some of the people had uprooted a telephone pole, and they smashed the front door down, which was made out of this beautiful colored glass. And they smashed it down, and they came running through the hallway, and they were running to go upstairs to the second floor. Now, in the meantime, we went to our parents' bedroom where they were sleeping, and we asked them what's happening, and again, they didn't want us to worry. They said, well, we don't know what's happening right now, but for now we will hide in the attic of our building. We lived on the first floor, and the teacher of our town lived in that room next to us. And then on the second floor lived the rabbi. And that's what those townspeople were doing with that telephone pole. They wanted to go through our apartment to get to the second floor to get to the rabbi. And on the third floor lived a non-Jewish family, and then on the fourth floor was the attic. So that's what we did. We went up to the attic, and there we met the family of the rabbi who was already up there. Now, the rabbi wasn't there, and we wanted to know what had happened to him. And so I looked through this little window of the attic, and I saw the rabbi standing on his veranda, and there were two, I guess they were SS men. They were holding him by the arm, and another one came along with some kind of a scissor or implement, I don't remember, and he held it and cut off his beard. And then later on I found out that he was hauled off to jail. And my father was sent to jail also, but he came back during the night, maybe after the first night. Now, they released him from jail, and I still do not know whether he was released from jail because he used to play chess with the chief of police, or because he was born in Poland and he had Polish citizenship. And our apartment was not ransacked too badly, but a lot of our furniture was broken and a lot of things were missing, but you could still live in it. However, the rabbi's apartment, when the people had rushed up there during the eve of my mother's birthday, they burned all of his books. He had this beautiful library, and they got torn and burned, and his furniture was really destroyed. And the people who were on the third floor, they pretended they didn't know anything was happening. I want people to understand that if they see injustice at the beginning, if we can do something the minute we see injustice, and not be bystanders, and not do like the people who lived on the third floor, and do like the people that were throwing the bricks and rocks through the window, and the policemen who went along with some of the rules that the Nazis had. If we stopped this at the beginning, well, such horrors as the ghettos and the concentration camps would never happen.
I don't remember exactly what day it was, but we woke up in the mornings and ready to go to school. I lived with Mrs. Bamberger, and we saw our synagogue on fire, the smoke coming out. And then we turned on the radio, and we heard the news that most of the synagogues were on fire. And we shouldn't go out of the house. Jews should stay in the house, don't go outside. And that's what we did. We stayed inside. And then came around mid-morning, it wasn't noon yet, and mid-morning came a horde of people to the door and didn't ring the bell, just smashed the door down, came in with scissors and all kinds of instruments and just demolished the whole apartment. I remember she had a beautiful library, a whole wall of beautiful books, and they down the books, some of them they tore apart. All the dishes out of the cupboards were smashed, all the plants were turned over, pillows and things were cut up. It was just terrible. And they went from, that was a mostly Jewish-occupied home there, and they went from door to door and did the same thing in the whole house. Well, I can't even describe anymore what our feelings were. We were just sitting there looking at a mess. How do you clean up? How do you do? How do you go out and buy new stuff? It was terrible, terrible. So the school was closed, the teachers were arrested, and so I went home to my hometown. And when I came to my hometown, the windows were smashed in again, and that was already a few days later. So my mother told me that my father was arrested, and under the circumstances which he was arrested, he tried to hide in the attic, and the policeman came and said, "Look, I have to bring in a body. If he doesn't come, I have to take you into custody." So my father gave himself up, and he was sent to Buchenwald. He was in Buchenwald for 4 weeks and was dismissed because he was a World War I veteran, fighting for the German army. And the dismissal was under the condition that he would leave the country right away. I didn't see my father when he came back from Buchenwald. I saw him a few weeks later, and he was there for 4 weeks in Buchenwald. And when I saw him again, he told my mother, "We have to get out of here. No matter what, we have to get out. No matter wherever we can find a place to go, we got to go." So, well, where do you go? So what happened? He took a little suitcase, and it became known that people smuggled people over the borders to Belgium, Holland, etc. So he went to the western part of Germany, and somebody took him over the border to Belgium, only with a little suitcase in his hand. All the assets were confiscated. We didn't have any control over our assets anymore. The bank books, everything has to be, well, they knew already what you had. I mean, they knew. But you had no control. It was called a Sperrkonto and everything. Only so much money you got every month to live off. That's it. You had to give up all your jewelry. Was confiscated. You could only keep your wedding ring and a watch. That's all. Everything else was confiscated. And also, a big payment had to be made as punishment for Kristallnacht. You know, people had to repair their own, the damage that was done. They had to repair from their own pockets. And on top of it, I don't know how many millions of dollars, marks at that time, had to be paid to the government as punishment. At that time, my mother and one more family were the only Jewish people left in that little town. And we had a dentist there who was our dentist, actually, but became a very, very big official Nazi in the party. And he wanted our property very badly. And when the war broke out in 1939, I think he hired a few people, and they just took my mother out and beat her up. And she had no choice, she had to leave. We have to be aware of what's happening around us. We have to be alert, and really, I don't think anything like this can happen again. I cannot believe it. I can't believe it. I have to tell the people what happened, so they know it shouldn't happen again. Should never happen again, something like that. Be aware of your neighbors, be aware of what's happening around you. It's terrible when you live under dictatorship. Awful. Even if you're not discriminated against, any dictatorship is terrible.
He instructed all of us to go into the basement with the storage bin that I referred to earlier and lock the door. Lock the door. It's an iron hook. And the door was wood with slats. You could see through it. And just go there and be silent, do nothing. No noise. And we did as we were told. And my father put himself on the inside of the front door and tried to barricade it, and within moments the knocking on the door began. And it wasn't just a knocking, and my father wouldn't let him in, it was locked, and held his shoulders against it. And but finally the guys with the axes came through and knocked the door off, so obviously, you know, he couldn't hold back anymore. And here came this gang of people from Ichstein. These were not the other guys who came from another town. And among them was some of the people he went to school with, some of his best friends, the guys from the card club, okay? And I remember my father, when we were playing cards in the years past, he used to put me on his lap and he taught me how to play Scott, which was a German game. And I learned pretty well. And I knew all these people, okay? So there were some of these. So these were, some I didn't know, some I did know, but they were all coming in. And I do remember that my father went to the one he knew the best, the one he thought was a friend of his. He says, I don't care what you do to me, but don't go into that storage bin. And he's been in my house many times, he knew where the storage bin was. And then they took my father, and they just stood him up in the courtyard, in the middle of the courtyard. And it wasn't that big a courtyard, it was just a courtyard. And they instructed him to stay there and don't move. And that's when it began, and I was so fearful. I could look through the slats of that wooden door, and I could see my father up the stairs. I was looking up, and I wanted to go to him and scream, but I was instructed no noise, and I didn't make any noise. And then it began, this terrible noise. All the windows were breaking in the house. Every window, every pane was gone, and that noise, it didn't stop. And the dishes that were broken. There wasn't a dish that remained unbroken. Everything was destroyed. And that noise I still hear it. That, you know, I guess the name Kristallnacht is apropos. And then the furniture came out from the top. Every piece of furniture that we own, I guess, came out the windows. And I remember my sister Vera saying, whispering in my ear, let's pray. Let's pray. And I was like this, and you could see the whites of my knuckles. I couldn't pray hard enough. And I just prayed for my father, because I saw him and all the stuff coming down all around him. He's trying to duck it, and some hit him, some didn't, but he didn't move. And the noise still stays with me. And then what seemed like an eternity, I'm sure it was only about 10, 15 minutes, if that much. But it was a lifetime in that storage bin. And it was over. It was over. Still didn't move. When they were gone, my father came to life, as it were. Went down to us in the storage bin, and we just cried and hugged and hugged and cried, and excuse me. It's just something I will never forget.